Welcome to the Happily Different podcast, where we unpack the interesting and unorthodox ways people approach their businesses and their lives. The mission of this show is to learn as much as we can from the people who weren't afraid to go their own way. My name is Ryan Jaskowitz, and I'm your host, as well as CEO of 12-5 Capital, a non-bank finance company helping companies accelerate the progress they are trying to make in their businesses and their lives. Today's guest is an overachiever, to say the least. Prior to her current path in life, she was a partner at Foley & Lardner, a large international law firm specializing, I believe, in restructuring, which maybe we'll get into a little bit there. But more recently, she's been featured on the Food Network, CBS Saturday Morning, Live with Kelly and Ryan, The Today Show, The Rich Roll Podcast. She just won a James Beard Award and is a New York Times bestselling author. I know her as a marathon runner, but you know her as the Korean vegan. Joanne Molinaro, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and that really great introduction.
Well, I mean, geez, if I had a story like that, I mean, talk about an awesome way to be introduced with all those. And I don't even think I hit all the places you've been featured on. So that was just like a little sampling. So, but I'm really excited, really grateful you're here. Excited to delve into the story from corporate attorney to food blogger and now to full-fledged cooking powerhouse. But first, let's talk family. So your parents were born in North Korea, or what is now North Korea. I don't think it was at the time. Talk to me a little bit about that. When did they come over and what was that journey like?
Yeah, well, my parents, you're correct, were born in what is now known as North Korea. My father was born in 1944, so prior to the end of World War II. My mom was born about 5 years later, so by that time, they were definitely a divided peninsula, but, I'm not sure exactly like north, south, whether that was demarked at that point, but they were born there, and both of them were essentially evacuated from their homes in that region of the peninsula when they were infants. In my father's case, he was 1 year old, probably about a year and a half year old. It was after the conclusion of World War II, and my grandmother, who was sort of single momming it temporarily. My grandfather had already fled that region because of his position with the Japanese government. He had to leave. And so my grandmother stayed behind for a little bit and then eventually said, you know what, I can't single mom this anymore, particularly in this part of the country. So she swaddled her baby to her back and crept through a rice paddy in the middle of the night to get past the communist soldiers in the 38th parallel to eventually join her husband in the southern region. My mother's story was equally dramatic. My grandparents evacuated their village in Ongjin, which was the province in which the Korean War began. And basically, they had to walk for like 2 weeks to the Yellow Sea in order to get onto a U.S. Navy ship. And unfortunately, by that time, my mom was starving to death. They didn't have any, real food and very little water. And so at that time, I think many people were unfortunately being faced with the prospect of losing their children through starvation. And my grandparents decided they would mercy kill their daughter by drowning her in the river, or in the sea, I should say. But luckily, a couple of American GIs caught them in time, gave my mother a chocolate bar, which gave her the sugar she needed and the calories she needed to survive the trip to South Korea. So that is how they became refugees. And of course, they eventually moved to Chicago.
I mean, that story, no kidding, gives me the chills and makes me obviously really grateful for, like, the first thing that comes to mind is you telling that story. Can you believe, like, the life we're in now where you and I are remotely doing a podcast and this is sort of work for you? Like, yeah, that's a pretty wild story.
It is. I remember this so vividly. I was walking into the office one morning and, we'll talk more about this, but it was a grind. And every morning when I went into the office, my heart rate would go up at least 10 beats per minute, and my, blood pressure would go up, and I'd be so stressed out about whatever it is I had to do that day. And I remember like turning around the corner, I could see the door of my building, and I thought to myself, yeah, this is a lot better than what my grandmother had to go through, than what my mother had to go through. I think I could tough it out for another day. And very grateful.
Yeah, I should say so. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about some of this stuff probably a little later in the show, but we've made a lot of progress in the world. We're not there yet, obviously, but like the baseline keeps rising, which is nice, which is nice to see. So your parents, they made it to the Yellow Sea and then hopped on the ship straight to the US, or was there a stop in between there?
No. So my mother's side. So my mom's story is a little different in terms of her journey than my father, but both of them, in my father's case, it was on his mother's back, literally on foot. And in my mother's case, it was on that U.S. Navy ship. They both ended up in South Korea, what is now known as South Korea.
Okay.
And, they were refugees. My mother in particular, her family, they were totally homeless. They had nowhere to go. They had nothing. I mean, they showed up, and my mom often recounts how she was digging for food in the ground during her early years because that's all the food they had. In my father's case, he would tell me that in the morning, his father would count out the number of beans that he was allowed to eat that day between himself and his siblings. So they lived a very deprived life. Notwithstanding that, my mom and my dad have very fond memories from their childhood, which I think is so beautiful. But ultimately, they found their way to the United States. In my mother's case, she came on a nursing visa because she went to nursing school in Seoul and was able to come here on that visa. And by virtue of that visa, was able to bring my father, her then husband, to Chicago as well. And that's how we all got settled here in the United States.
Amazing. What a great story. I mean, that was going to be my question. Were they married in Korea before moving to the States, or did they meet there? That's amazing. And I feel like the story typically, this is a total anecdotal, but usually it's like the husband goes to America and then brings the family along after. And in this case, it was the reverse of that. It's a pretty cool little story there.
Yeah, my mother was, she was very atypical in a lot of different ways, but my grandparents, they wanted to have a boy. They really wanted to have a boy, but they kept having girls. And eventually my grandmother, she miscarried multiple times and she almost died, I think, in a couple of situations. And my mother was so scared that her mother would die from trying to have a boy that she finally told her parents, "I'll be your boy. Let me be your boy," And so they kind of took her for her word, and they, kind of apprenticed her. My grandfather apprenticed her for a while. And in that way, I think even as a little girl, she took on a much larger leadership role in her family than I think would typically be expected of a not even first child. She was the second child, and certainly of a girl. And I think that mentality kind of lasted her whole life, certainly in the dynamics between my mom and my dad. And I think she certainly passed that on to me as well.
Right. I can already see a little bit of that story in you. And that was going to be like a lead into my next question, which was, typically in a lot of immigrant stories, the parents are hard drivers, in terms of like high expectations, because they went through that story from a year and a half old to where they are today, finally in Chicago. I'm assuming no kids at that point, but maybe so. Is that a true coloring of what your parents were like? Were they not typical immigrant story, but a classic immigrant story of, hey, we've done all this work. We expect a lot of you, Joanne?
They did expect a lot of me. They were very demanding. I think it wasn't more like, oh, we did so much for you, so you owe us. It wasn't like that. It was more just like, hey, we know what horrible life can look like. Like, we know what hardship is. You have no idea, Joanne, what hardship is. And we want to save you from that. We want to protect you from that kind of hardship. And so, Korea is traditionally, both halves of the peninsula, they are a country known for scholarship. That is what they are known for. Their whole history is of scholarship. So both my parents were like, that is the ticket. That is your ticket to safety, is doing really, really well in school. So my gosh, yeah, they were always pummeling me on my grades. But at the same time, I've talked to many other children of Korean American and Chinese American and other Asian American immigrants, and my parents were like pretty cool. Like, they were hard on me, but they loved me, and they showed me immense warmth and comfort. My grandmothers in particular provided me not just, safety and motivation, but also laughter and games and all those things that you want for a child. So I didn't want for anything growing up.
That's interesting, because typically you hear high expectations, hard driving, that usually doesn't come with the warmth and the joy next to it. And I think that's the hard balance.
Yeah.
As a parent myself right now, that's really hard to tell my kids, like, listen, you are growing up in a world where my great grandparents couldn't even fathom. They couldn't fathom the world my kids grow up in. And that's a minor slice compared to what your grandparents look at you or would look at you and say, and so it's that balance of like having that warmth and that love and all that, but also having high expectations for what you're going to do in life.
Yeah, I remember reading through my mother's, my mother and my father both wrote letters to me to help me kind of understand their history and their childhoods. And I remember reading through both of them. My mother would talk about how her favorite thing to do growing up was to pick the blackberries off the blackberry bushes along the mountains of Korea. And this is, of course, when she had no home and there was very little food. And she talked about how the persimmon flowers are so beautiful, and how when she was a little girl, she would pick them off the ground and she would eat them because she thought that if she ate these flowers, she would become as beautiful as the flowers. And my father, he used to tell me how much he loved running, how much he loved playing soccer with the neighborhood kids, even if they were the rich kids and he was obviously the poor kid. So when you think about those things, they're able to find so much beauty and immense joy during some of the most hard times of their lives. That is going to carry through even as they become parents, even as they go through, all of the trappings of expectations and pressure and those things of being a mom and a dad. And I think that's where a lot of that warmth continued to reside in our household.
Yeah, I totally see that. And getting back to that, that's a choice though. Your parents made a mindset choice to go, and that's something we all could learn, having just gone through a pandemic and all the challenges we're going through, is that, yes, while things are hard, there is a choice to continue to see awe in the world, to continue to see joy in the world, to continue to find happiness in the small things in life. And people choose those directions. We know plenty of people who don't choose that direction, who let it all build up on top of them, and there's no joy in that. So that's really interesting that, yes, that was able to pass through to parenthood, which is a good lesson for all the new and upcoming parents out there as you're raising your kids. So your mom comes to Chicago. She's a nurse in Chicago. Your dad comes along too. Any kids yet at that point?
No, so they didn't have kids until they were fully immigrated here in the United States. My mother had to pass the boards in order to finalize her visa. And that was another really interesting story from my mom, which was she didn't speak English. I mean, she learned like, hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. Like, that's what she learned in her schooling in Korea. So she didn't know English. And so she had to study not just the boards, like passing the nursing boards, but she also had to learn English in a very short period of time. And that was really difficult for her. She had very little money. She had, I think, $800 with her, which is all the money she was able to save after 2 years of working as a nurse in Korea.
Wow.
And that was all she had to kind of sustain her while she was studying for these boards. And She didn't pass. She failed that first time, and it was horrifying and terrifying. And she very nearly went back to Korea and just said, you know what, hang it up, man. I'm just going to stay here. I have a job here. I have a family here. Why the heck am I here in Chicago, Illinois?
Yeah.
She was actually, she lived right on Lakeshore Drive. So she was right in front of the lakefront path during that time in her life. And every time I run the lakefront path, I think about my mom and her story.
That's awesome. Did she work at a hospital near the lakefront path?
I think she worked at Cook County, as just temporarily while she was studying for her boards. Ultimately, there's this wonderful story about how she failed her nursing boards. She called her dad and told him, "Hey, Dad, I failed. I'm just going to come home to Korea. Like, I'm sorry. I know you all were counting on me to be this big success, but I failed. I can't do it." And he was like, "Okay, totally. You can come home. We'll always welcome you home. We love you no matter what. But I think that if you come home now, you might end up regretting it for the rest of your life." And that is not what you want to hear when you're at that sort of
certainly not
moment. Yeah. But she took it to heart and she went to the lakefront path. That is actually where my mother always used to go when she was really stressed out or when she was upset or when she just wanted to see something extraordinary, because she'd never lived next to a lake or something like that before. And she just thought it was so amazing. And so she went to the lakefront path and she was walking there. It was one of those cold winter days in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And she was walking and she saw an old vagrant, a homeless woman walking towards her. And my mom was like, "Oh no, like, I do not have any money to be sparing for a homeless person. I need to keep this all myself. Like I don't have an exam. I have an exam that I just failed." And so she was trying to kind of avoid this woman, but this woman kept walking towards her. And finally, sure enough, she said, "Ma'am, do you have some spare change for a cup of coffee?" And my mom, in her head, she's like, "No, I don't." But she did. She had some change in her pockets. And instead of listening to her head, she reached into her pockets and pulled out all that spare change and she poured it into this woman's hands. And my mom told me that this woman, she's kind of like a tall, older lady with like gray hair and really beautiful blue eyes, according to my mom. She grabs my mother's hands and she says, "You're going to pass that test." And then she walks away. And then my mom passed the test.
Oh my gosh.
This all happened on the lakefront path.
Yeah,
I know.
Well, we
is.
all like you said, the lakefront path in Chicago is a magical place, and it's funny because I tell people that aren't from Chicago, I try to describe it because my kids call it the ocean, and I don't correct them, or at least when they were younger, I don't correct because it looks more like an ocean than it does what most people consider a lake, and so for them to see it, it's just. Like my favorite thing is bringing people to Chicago who've never been, and that first walk out to the lakefront is just something to behold, something magical. So clearly, your mom had some magic there too. So you grew up in Chicago, but did you grow up in Chicagoland proper, or were you in the suburbs?
So we were in Chicago for the first 4 years of my life. So in Chicago proper, I think it was like in the Ravenswood area. That was very close to where my mother worked. She worked at Swedish Covenant Hospital basically for her entire career after she passed the boards. And then when we were 4, we moved to Skokie. And then later on, we moved to Wilmette. And then later on, we moved to Wheeling. So we've been sort of all around.
Yeah, all around those northern suburbs. Do you have siblings?
Mm-hmm. I do. I have a younger brother, and he currently lives in Buffalo Grove.
Okay, so he's up there. He's up there as well. Okay, but you grew up in Chicago. Having grown up in Chicagoland myself, similar to you, very similar. We moved to Chicago when I think was 4. Actually, we were only there for maybe a few months or a year, but then moved out to the suburbs, just a different direction than you. In your words, how did it shape you? How did being a kid from because now you're a kid from Chicago. I mean, you don't have the same ties to Korea as your parents do. You're just a kid from Chicago. How did it shape you?
I think that, I can't compare my childhood to anyone else's because I don't know enough about other people's. I can only speak to just the details of my childhood. And it was beautiful. It was safe. It was fun. It was all those things. I mean, I was on my bicycle like every day, you know, running around, playing tag with my brother, hide and seek with my grandma. There was a park right around the corner from our house, and we would go there, and she taught me how to swing. We were always playing with the neighborhood kids, and it was really diverse. I mean, there was a Japanese American family across the street. There was a Chinese American family like kitty corner to our house. You know, my best friend, Sally, she was Korean American. She lived a few blocks from me. And, you know, there were also non-Asian kids there, you know? So it was just like a very normal, like I didn't see like anything very different until I got to, I think kindergarten was when I realized, oh, there is something a little different. I don't speak this language that everyone else is speaking. So that was a little tough. My grandmothers raised me and they didn't speak English. So Korean was my first language. And I didn't bother to learn English until I had to in school. And that was the beginning of a lot of sort of, you know, grappling with what it meant to be a little bit different than everyone else.
That was good. Man, you led me into my question because I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot, and one of the storylines I see in children of immigrant stories is this idea of either a big embrace of their culture or a pushback of that and trying to fit in with the American culture, whatever you want to call it. Where did you land in that spectrum?
Definitely the latter. I was so unprepared for being different because I was just like, I was so sheltered during the first few years of my life. I just thought everybody lived like us. We all eat Korean food and we all speak Korean. And, you know, I just didn't know any different. So I was so unprepared when I got to school that first day and I realized, oh my God, like everything about me is not normal. And I'm so different from everyone else. And also I remember very distinctly a couple of kids were making fun of me for being different.
Right.
And I mean, no kid likes that, you know, so I didn't
kids are cruel.
blame.
Kids are cruel.
Yeah. But I didn't blame the kids. I blamed my grandma. You know, I was like, why did you send me to school like this? Like, how dare you? And that really was the beginning of some pushback. I didn't want to be Korean. I just wanted to be like everyone else. I wanted to be American. I wanted to eat American food, wear American clothes, speak perfect English, and, you know, watch American shows and listen to American music. So that really was very much my life for, I would say, the next decade.
Yeah, I love that because, well, I don't love that part of it, but it is this sort of storyline that continues to happen where we're all in these just pendulums going back and forth in life, right? And like you're on this one pendulum of thinking everyone's like me, and then got smacked in the face basically and said, wait, no, I'm different than everybody. And so you're like, wait, let's go to the other side of that pendulum. I don't want to be anything like this over here. So it's pretty interesting to me how that, and for a white male who grew up in the Midwest, I have no understanding of that whatsoever. So that's why it fascinates me, this idea of embracing or pushing back. And it's pretty cool to see, you know, obviously, as we'll get into in a little bit, like you've very much embraced your culture. Not like you're back on that swing back the other direction. It's pretty cool to see. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this a little bit, but I want to jump into where you're at in the rest of your story here. But I just want to touch for a second on both of us being runners, and we both know what an impact moving our bodies has on, you know, both the physical mind, you know, the physical nature, and then the mental nature and all that. What does moving your body mean for you, and where did that sort of begin, and what's it mean to you in terms of like your day-to-day lifestyle?
You know, I didn't realize how much joy movement brought me until I started running, and which is weird because I hated running. Like there's this really funny story about how we had to run in gym class once. And I found out during second period biology that we were running in gym for 20 minutes straight. And I was like, oh my God. And I literally had a panic attack. And by fourth period wood shop, I clean passed out. from just the shock of knowing we would have to run for 20 minutes in gym class. So that's how much I hated running. I was literally carted off into the emergency room. But unfortunately, I had to run 2 days later anyway when I got back to school. So when I started running long distance, I didn't do it because I liked running or there was some joy in movement. But what happens is when you're forced to take a break, usually due to injury or, maybe after a marathon and you really shouldn't be running too much and you're still in recovery, any kind of small running, like I remember, I had to run down the block to catch up with Anthony and my dog because they had, gotten a little bit ahead of me when we took our walk together. And I ran. And I just remember this is such a wonderful feeling. Like my legs are moving and pumping and my feet are slapping on the ground. And this just feels so good. And every time I go for a long run or I go for a run when I don't want to, when the weather sucks or, my body's not feeling into it, I try and remember that sort of feeling that I had, in just like exulting in my body's ability to do those things. And that's really important because not everyone has that ability. And I think that just being really grateful for my body and its capacity is very important to me, particularly, as a woman, I, still struggle a lot with body dysmorphia, body image issues, and always reminding myself, dude, your body has done so much for you. Your body is absolutely extraordinary. So stop putting it down. That's very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, it's something that we as runners kind of take for granted. Obviously this isn't a running podcast, but it comes out in me all the time on this thing. But, it's something we take for granted that I often have to remind myself because we do it so much every single day for months on end that, oh, I love this thing. This is the thing I love. And I never come back from a run in a worse mood than I left, right? There's a lot of times I leave for my run and I couldn't be in a worse mood. And not to say that I'm super happy by the time I get back, but it's never worse than it was before. And so I think it's something that, when we talk about Happily Different here at 12.5, we there's a lot of talk about the mind and mindfulness and all those things, but there's such a physical component towards moving. And I can only relate to running because that's the only thing I do. But, whether it's cycling or anything, there's just something about moving your body that ties the whole thing together, I feel like. And so as we kind of talk about that. So you talked about your body, you talked about this idea that how important running is to you and how important your body is. And it's this vessel for this person who has all sorts of different stories and challenges and joys and all that kind of stuff. You have a pretty incredible story here from going from corporate attorney, which I wanted to ask if you're still doing that. So you can touch on that in the story here a little bit, but help me unpack for our listeners going from corporate attorney to becoming where you are today. So can you take me back to the first moment that you thought about putting yourself out there and saying, I like to cook. Let me figure out how I do that.
Sure. So I started my practice in 2004 at Foley and Lardner, which is, like you said, an international law firm. I was just a general commercial litigator at the time and then went into bankruptcy, I think my third year, and basically remained a trial lawyer the whole time. So I was a litigator in bankruptcy, but I also did a lot of general commercial work, like in antitrust and fraud litigation as well. So I was just a trial lawyer. And I started my blog in 2016 called The Korean Vegan. And it was because my husband and I had gone plant-based and I didn't know anyone else who was Korean and who was vegan at the same time. And I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to eat Korean food anymore. So kind of like you said, in the beginning of my life, between like 4 and 13, I was like, I want to eat McDonald's and spaghetti, but by the time I got to college, I was like, I hate spaghetti. I want sundubujigae and kimchi and doenjangjjigae. I was very into Korean food. Now, over the course of my life and as a professional, I just love food. I loved all foods, but Korean food was really important to me. And it was more than just food. It was a part of my identity. So when we decided to go vegan, I was like, well, I got to do something. There's no Korean vegan restaurants around me. And, my mom doesn't live with me anymore. She can't make me food all the time. So I need to just figure out how to make Korean vegan food. So I started doing that. And as a result of that, I was like, well, since nobody else is doing it, I will write this blog on Korean vegan food. And so that's what I did. I was not like a professional cook. I learned everything I know from YouTube and Food Network and maybe a little bit here and there from my mom and my aunts. But, I'm just like everyone else. I was like, oh, I just want to cook my own meals. I think particularly athletes, we all, probably can relate to that a little bit more than the average professional is we're very mindful of what we put into our bodies. And that was certainly the case when I went plant-based.
Okay, so who taught you to cook though? Who was like the first influence?
The first influence is Rachel Ray from the Food Network.
It's not your mom, it's not your grandma, it's not your aunt, it's Rachel Ray.
No, it's Rachel Ray. I mean, that's why there's so much Italian food in my repertoire is because of her. I literally I learned how to boil things and really basic things like how to cut an onion or how to salt your pasta water or how to sear a bit of protein. I learned so much from her, and that's how I gained the confidence to then, okay, you know what? I have the basics. Now I'm going to go to YouTube. And I'm going to learn a little bit more advanced. Okay, I know how to do these basic things. Now I want to learn how to make Korean food because I know how to do these basics. And then when I talk to my mom or I talk to my aunts, then I was able to take that conversation to that next level. Okay, no, I don't need to know how you do boil the water. I need to know how do you extract that flavor? What is this ingredient? Why are you adding this? These sort of nuanced things that sometimes get lost in translation.
Well, you got quite the independent streak, as we can already see. But do you think you waited to go to your mom and aunt because you wanted to show them that you had a base level of knowledge that, hey, I don't need you completely for this. I just need your little tips and tricks?
I think it was more, there are a lot of reasons I think why I didn't approach them at first. Maybe some of it was that, but I think it was more language barrier issues. My mom, not so much. She's very she talks like me. You wouldn't even know she was an immigrant, honestly, if you talk to her. But certainly my aunts, particularly the one who's the best cook in our family, she doesn't speak English very much. And so that language barrier really prevented me from being comfortable enough to ask her. My mom, honestly, she didn't cook very much growing up. So I didn't really think of her as a cook. I thought of my grandmothers who did all the cooking for us as cooks. So she never really came to my mind until much later as a potential source of information. And then, finally expediency. It's sometimes just easier to Google blah, blah, blah. How do I make this instead of picking up the phone and, asking my mom and, her being I don't know how many tablespoons. I just use this, so
whereas you just want, tell me the tablespoons, man. Tell me the tablespoons.
I need a recipe.
I don't want a dash of this.
Exactly.
So you sort of learned to cook through Rachel Ray, YouTube, and then family, which I find hilarious. But what is it? Well, let me step back. What has your relationship with food been like? You kind of talked about it a little bit. So went into heavy on McDonald's and spaghetti, the classic American cuisines when you were a kid. And then as you became an adult, you talked about going vegan. If I read correctly, your partner wanted to go before you did, and you didn't actually want to go right away vegan. And so this all kind of comes out of sort of a hardship for you a little bit, air quotes around that. So what's that relationship with food like? What was it like over the course of your early adulthood and all that?
Food plays probably too much of a role in my life, which is funny considering what my career is. I love food. I love eating. I love food. I love fellowship through food. I love so many of the memories that I have, surrounding food with my family in particular. I think that food can also be a source of great anxiety to me. Partly because, growing up, of course, people made fun of me for my food, so that wasn't great. And then also just being told for so much of my life that, on the one hand, you need to eat more, but on the other hand, you're too big, you're too fat.
Yeah.
So, being told those things my whole life, food became a very confusing thing for me because I love to eat it. And some of my happiest memories were around food and my family. But on the other hand, I was basically taught to be afraid of food because it was making me unattractive and unlovable to people, or at least that's what I believed. So there was that sort of personal struggle. I think that much later in life as an adult, I started to realize that food is one of the few things that I had that connected me to my culture and to my Koreanness. Partly my own fault. I didn't keep up with my Korean. So while I spoke, according to my mother, beautiful and fluent Korean when I was 3 and 4, by now I can barely hold a conversation with anyone in Korean. And, I had assimilated pretty effectively as an adult. But there were a few things that I wanted to keep that were part of my Koreanness, and food was certainly part of that. So, kind of referring back to this part of my life where Anthony, my partner, he said, "Hey, I'm going to go vegan." I was like, all right, you do that. I'm not going to go vegan because
enjoy.
Korean people can't go vegan. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what, that's fine. Do you even know what that means? So that was really the initial reaction, but it was born out of this anxiety that this person in my life was trying to take away my Koreanness from me, because he didn't understand how important Korean food had become to me at that point in my life. But obviously the answer to that was the Korean vegan in many, many, many respects. And I'm now much more aware and able to articulate the role, sometimes confusing role, that food has in my life.
Right. That's a great answer. Well, speaking on, you talked about being made fun of for the food and your culture. I just want to spend 2 seconds on this because I don't even know how to say this, but what's your take on the fact that like Korean culture and cuisine is like just, and maybe it's only in my family right now, but like that's all there is right now. Like it's my kids are singing Korean. They have no idea what it means, but they're singing K-pop, all the time. So much so they're watching, YouTube videos of interviews of, well, what does this person like to eat? So that person says what they like to eat. Well, now my daughter wants to eat that. So we did an entire birthday party. It was, I'm blanking on the group, not BTS.
BTS. Okay.
She's going to kill me. Oh my gosh. What's the other one? The girl group.
Oh, the black.
Anyways,
is it Pink?
Blackpink. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Blackpink. Do not tell her I forgot that. Anyways, so we did a Blackpink party. Like we had like the signs and the this and the that and the balloons. And then I was tasked with not vegan Korean food, but I was tasked with doing my best to cook Korean dishes and make a proper kimchi and all that kind of stuff, which I love personally. It's probably that or Vietnamese is my favorite cuisine, right? But it's just funny that something that even only 20 years ago, or let's say 20, I don't know how old you are, but let's say 20 years ago, you were made fun of for something is so like in the zeitgeist right now. And just what's your take?
I think that's wonderful. And I'm so happy to hear that your kids are enjoying Korean food and that you're making your own kimchi. That is very impressive. I think that's really exciting. And, of course, there's a part of me that feels a little bit soothed by that in terms of, whatever like residual, bitterness I might have over people who made fun of me for eating this food that's like so popular right now. But I also am very conscientious of ensuring that people don't just see Korean culture as kimchi. Like, that's it. That's their kimchi and Blackpink. that's who they are,
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously there's so much more to Korean culture than K-pop and Korean food and Parasite and all of these things. However wonderful and beautiful it is that, there's representation out there. It's also tempting, I think, for some people to view us as that's all that you are. And I don't want that to happen. There's dimensionality in every culture in the entire world. And so, what I view part of the Korean vegan's job is to breathe dimensionality into Korean American culture, into the diaspora, into Korean culture, and through storytelling and recipe development and just, a bit of vulnerability.
Yeah, I'm with you there, because that was literally our question. My wife and I, we were like, are we even allowed to do this party?
Oh,
like, is this are we allowed to do this? And we were coming at it from a great place. We're like, well, we want to celebrate this. Our kid loves this thing, right? And it's this like little crack in the door, or, a little crack that my kid can walk through and explore a different community. And, maybe down the road we can do something interesting with that. And I'm fascinated by it. I just love that my kids are asking me, hey, can I download Duolingo, not so I can learn Spanish, but so I can learn Korean? Like, that to me is like a good, fun thing.
I think that's amazing. And, I downloaded Duolingo to learn Italian. So, I think that's really incredible. And I think that's really cool. And I think that people are taking it a little bit too far when they're policing people's birthday parties inside their own homes.
Yes.
I think that's a little strange. It's one thing if you guys decide to have one, and another thing if some super famous person has one, like that's a little bit different. And, I think that's really beautiful. And I love what you say, like a crack in the door. A crack in the door to what? To another culture, to empathy, to compassion, to story sharing, to vulnerability, to friendship. These are the things that we are in desperate need of in this country right now. So I can't think of anything more beautiful than your little girl saying, hey, I want to try some real kimchi that, somebody actually made.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be, I'm going to be super cool now for interviewing you. Now I get to tell my daughter that I, not only did we do a Blackpink party, but I interviewed the Korean vegan, and she's super famous. So,
well, I'm glad to make you.
So that'll be fun.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about then. Okay, the Korean vegan. Here we are, corporate attorney, big practice, probably working 80 hours a week. Life is changing. You start your blog. That probably, I don't know the whole story around that, but that probably goes pretty well. But it's certainly not where it is today. Your ride has been a rocket ship. And if I read correctly, it's literally been like the last 18 months. Like, not like this is not a long period, right?
No. So I started the Korean vegan in 2016, and it was a total hobby. I was working a lot as a mid-level. No, I was a partner. I was a junior partner at that time. So, I think I was past the point where I was working like a crazy lady. That would have been right before I made partner. But shortly after making partner, I started to get pretty busy. And particularly, I would say like around 2016, 17, I just got staffed on a pretty big case, and I was pretty much lead litigation counsel on that case. And so I was really busy and really enjoying my job, actually, because it was a really cool case, and I was working with partners that I really enjoyed working with, and my client was freaking amazing. So it was a great case, but I was also doing this thing on the side, and I was like, I don't know where this is going to go. Like, I'm just doing it because it's fun and it's challenging me in a creative way. I think the other thing was that I felt so helpless and powerless after the election in 2016. And I didn't know like how to express my fear or my sadness and feelings of sort of bitterness. And I was very keen on making sure that however I reacted to this, that it was productive, that it wasn't just going to make things worse. And so I was like, well, how do I channel these feelings in a way that is good like good and helpful instead of hurtful and stupid, I was seeing a lot of that. So I decided to start sharing stories about my mom and my dad and my grandma on my Instagram, because I was like, well, people are here for recipes, but they can get recipes anywhere, right? I mean, they can get them on my blog, on my Facebook or whatever.
Sure.
Why not listen to this story about my mom and my dad and how they came to the United States? Or why not listen to a story about how hard they work to be who they are? And maybe if you listen to enough of these stories, you'll start to see immigrants and immigrant families in the United States just a little bit differently. That was really kind of my thinking. Again, it wasn't a business. I'm not sitting here being like, oh, this is my side hustle. No, I lost tens of thousands of dollars a year on this hobby of mine. So it was never intended to be a money generating thing. And then I was offered a book deal in 2018 based upon my photography and my writing. And so I did do that. And that was a nice little, chunk of change, but that's what it was compared to what I was making as a lawyer. So I didn't, again, view it as any real serious money generating thing. And then in 2020, I started a TikTok and everything sort of changed. And it was then that I was able to start really thinking, oh, wow, there could be a business out of this, one that would allow me to step away from my practice as a lawyer.
Amazing. Amazing. So one thing I wanted to pull the thread on a little bit was your videos. And so I have, I should be full disclosure, I had to use somebody else's Instagram and TikToks to kind of find your stuff, because I'm off of that. Okay. So don't be mad at me. You have plenty of followers. You don't need one more. But what I find fascinating about it is your videos were interesting to me because they weren't just instructional. They were telling a story while instructing. How did you land on that format? To me, that's such a different thing versus pour 1 tablespoon in and then stir. And then, no, you were telling the story over that. How did you land on that?
There are a lot of different reasons why I did that. But, kind of speaking to your audience, it's a matter of supply and demand. There is a lot of supply when it comes to those recipe instructional type of videos. Is there maybe a little bit too much in terms of how much demand there is for that? Maybe. And I realized that if I continued to do that my chance of differentiating myself and really becoming a market leader in that space would be infinitely harder than if I tapped into a demand that was as yet not fully satisfied or satisfied at all. So I created this new category. You can think of it as either creating demand by creating a new category, or it can simply be, I created this category because I felt that there was a demand and it hadn't yet been satisfied. And that is what you now see, which is, okay, well, I'll do the cooking video. It's alluring. It, pulls people in. They're visually, they're like, what is that? But then let's also hit them with something auditory. What are they hearing? Let's hit them in their emotions to make sure that this is a memorable video for them, makes them want to watch more. And that's where the storytelling came in. But, I think more truthfully, the supply and demand thing, I went to the University of Chicago. That's inbred into my brain, but
exactly.
I think the other,
exactly. You can't go there without that being part of it.
Everything, basically. But I think there was, truthfully, it was just, hey, I want these stories about my mother and my father and my grandmother and my family to hit people's hearts. And I want them to be memorable because I think there's still a lot of work to be done in this country on bridging divides that don't need to be there. And I figured, well, I can't write captions on TikTok. They only give you 3 sentences. So I guess I just have to read my captions into my video. And that's really how it came to be. Yeah.
That's so cool. And I have to pause because your when you talked about differentiating, and I don't want to make this about 12.5 at all, but that's exactly what that, and we didn't plan this, but that's exactly what the core value came out of, which was when I started the business, it was, I could not compete with other lenders on price. My cost of capital was far too high, right? So I couldn't compete in that world. So I had to create it. I'm not going to say I created a different market or segment, but certainly I looked at it and I said, well, I need to do something else to differentiate from everyone else, which is what you did. You said everyone has recipe videos. Everyone has recipes they can go do. Everyone can show you how to cut something, slice something, whatever it might be. For me, it was all my competitors looked at themselves as lenders of last resort. And so they hired people of last resort and they took on clients of last resort. And I said, well, maybe we'll do the opposite. We'll be a lender of first resort. So we'll look for young, hungry companies instead of the types of companies you were working with, which were bleeding and in bankruptcy and things like that. And so it's interesting though, because that's the key is you made a decision at some point to say, I can't compete here. I'm not going to follow the herd because I can't compete there. So I'm going to go here. And I think that's harder than people think. It's not easy because it would be far easier to follow the path of those people in front of you that said, this works, watch.
That is so true. And also you being different doesn't guarantee you success. Like you can't just be like, oh, well, I'm just going to do this thing different. And then I win. Like that's not, if there isn't a demand for your difference, then there's no value. There's no incremental value that you would actually be bringing to the world. So you have to figure out. And
you don't know going into it.
No, you literally don't know. I mean, you can take educated guesses. We're all consumers ourselves. So there's some level of understanding like, well, what do people want? But there's never a guarantee. And so it is very difficult. And not only that, I mean, look, first of all, like I know my TikTok did really, really well. That is like an aberration. That doesn't happen to most people where all of a sudden, within a couple days, they have 100,000 followers. That doesn't happen to most people. So I was very lucky in that way. But, even before then, as a food photographer, I decided to do a very different style of food photography than what was successful, or at least had a track record of success. Everyone else is doing these beautiful, like white backgrounds, super saturated colors and, very commercial looking photographs. And everyone was getting hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram from that. But I was like, I don't think that's pretty. I don't like it. So I'm just going to do my own style. I wanted to develop myself as an artist. And I wasn't using the Korean vegan for money. So I had that latitude to be able to do that. Unlike you, where this is your living that you're playing with. I was playing with the hobby.
Yeah.
But even as a hobby, oh my God, there were so many times during that process where I was, refining my aesthetic and refining my look when I was like, I should just go and do what everybody else is doing. Why am I, going down this path? What am I doing? Everyone else has a proven track record of success. Why am I not just doing what they're doing? And it was really hard, to stick to my guns and say, no, I really believe in what I'm doing. I think it's beautiful. And I think it adds to the conversation instead of repeating the conversation. And so absolutely, it's really hard. And honestly, if I didn't have my husband who was like, no, you're good. Like you need to stick to what you're doing. There were probably times where I would have compromised my artistic vision just so that I could get more views and more likes.
No question. I mean, I feel like I'm talking to myself just in I guess a more famous version of myself in you. I working backwards a little bit. I need to co-sign on some of the things you said, which are number one, a good partner, a great partner is, as you know very well, is such a crucial thing to have in your corner. And I think it's not valued enough,
Absolutely.
I guess, in our society is what that actually means to that success. I also, you talked about luck. I also had being only 23 years old on my side. So I had that young gravitas of, well, I don't have anything else. I got no kids or anything like that. So I can take this chance. But I used to tell people what I was doing. I used to tell people in our industry, I used to say, well, we're going to do it differently. We're going to do it this way, not get into all the details of that. But they would ask, and I would immediately follow it up with, I'll let you know in 5 years if it worked. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. I had no idea if there was a demand for it. I had, again, educated guesses, but it was this idea of stepping out and saying, you said, you didn't like the aesthetic of those photos. You didn't like the videos that were being made. And I looked at finance and I said, in my opinion, it's such a good thing. I don't like the way it's being performed. I don't like the way it's being provided. And so I just didn't even want to work in that space if that's the way it was going to be. And so I only had one option, which was to do it my own way. And thankfully it worked out. But just like you, I mean, the truth is, to tell all you entrepreneurs out there, we don't know going into it.
No, we don't. And there's a lot of second guessing, second, triple, quadruple guessing along the way where you just have to like stick to it, you know?
Right. It's so hard. Like so much of being and I don't want to work backwards here, but you talk, I read a bunch of articles that interviewed you, and such a theme that I hear in there is fighting, perseverance, and being an entrepreneur is just willing to persevere a little bit longer than the other person. It's not about being smarter. It's not about, I can tell you that much for myself. It's not about having some amazing idea. It's about literally persevering slightly longer. It's not even like incredibly, just being willing to get past that little part where most people go, you know what, I'm good. I'm going to cut and run here.
Well, I mean, I think I always
so interesting.
Analogize everything in my life to running. But if you think about it, like it's,
Me too.
We live in the microseconds. Like that's like very important to us, like that's the difference between a PR and not a PR. Like that's huge. And so, that perseverance for a little bit longer. But I also think that, and I'm sure you can speak to this, Ryan, in your own career is, trying and not giving up doesn't necessarily mean that you're beating your head against the wall and continuing to do something that obviously isn't working. It just means that believing in your dream and believing in yourself, even when the odds are against you, and in believing in yourself, having the courage to pivot and to adjust, and to learn from your mistakes and to grow from them. But always it's not like, it's not about giving up on your dreams. It's like sometimes I always say this, I'm like, some dreams should be given up on. They just suck. Like they really don't deserve to be, believed in forever. And, some dreams, they are just not meant to come true. Like you shouldn't, you actually are lucky that they didn't come true. But it's not about believing in dreams. It's about believing in yourself and not giving up on yourself. That is so much more important. And when I decided, hey, I'm going to stick to this moody, dark look that nobody else appears to like, it was me saying, I believe in myself. I believe in my aesthetic value. I believe in my style. I believe in my voice. And the same thing with the stories. All right. Everybody else is doing tutorials, but I believe in my stories. I believe in me. And it was that sort of pushed me down my path. It doesn't mean that I haven't changed a bunch of things about the Korean vegan since 2016. It just means that I believed in the Korean vegan.
Well, and to add on to that, you keep saying you believed in yourself. You also believed in yourself enough to know that you'll notice when you need to make a change or a pivot or a slight adjustment. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, well, this is what I decided at this point, and then I'm sticking to that forever. There is a little bit, it's just like life is in black and white. There is a little bit of stick-to-itiveness that needs to happen so that you can at least understand what it's like to have a little gumption, have a little believability in yourself. But there also is this flexibility in that to say, all right, yeah, that's not working. Let's change that. But I believe I'll be able to figure it out. I think where people, and even myself mentally, sometimes you have to build yourself back up, is this idea of at the point when it's not working going, well, I can't figure it out. I'll never be able to figure it out. It's like, no, this thing isn't working right now. I will be able to figure it out in the future. I just don't know what that is yet.
Yeah, I think that's hard, Ryan. I mean, to have that sort of confidence in yourself and in your judgment. I think that many people probably are second guessing their second guessing. You know what I mean? There's these multiple layers of self-doubt. And so it's hard to battle through that. and believe in your instincts, believe in the judgment that you've honed to that point in your life. I think the thing that always gives me some comfort when I get to that point where like, well, what if I'm not making the right decision? What if the other decision is the right decision? Is to realize that like, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do the wrong thing, the quote wrong thing. It's okay to cause disaster every once in a while. Those are things that you'll learn from. And even if you don't get it right today, that mistake will likely prevent you from getting it wrong in the future. So all of these little setbacks and failures, mini failures, it's easy to say that from where I'm perched, but I do think that many of the things that I did wrong or inefficiently, which is another thing that I hate, helped me to do things better today,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that this takes time, I believe that, young 20-year-old, 23-year-old Ryan believed he could learn wisdom quickly. And I just think wisdom comes with time, and there's no other way to get it really other than experience and time. Like you can't fast track it. You can read all the top 10 lists of what to do and what not to do, but the wisdom comes with time. And I just find it so interesting because what you're saying, the idea of making mistakes and being willing to, we put so much stock in these decisions we're making. And the secret that I think we're all learning as we get older is that none of it actually matters. No one cares. None of it matters in the grand scheme of things. And life works itself out as long as you're willing to bet on yourself and you have a good team of people, whether it's your family or whoever it is around you. But no one really cares about these little minuscule decisions that we think are gigantic decisions. No one really cares. And I think once I realized that, I was like, oh, a little bit of a weight off my shoulder.
Whatever we can do to remove some of that weight. But I think that the most important thing, at least in my life, I'm only 43, so I don't know like everything, but the most important thing is who you surround yourself with. And that can be, from a family perspective, from a friend perspective, from a professional perspective. I think that the people in your life that's the most important thing. And I always go back to in my life, like when Anthony and I decided, all right, Joanne's going to withdraw from partnership and she's going to pursue the Korean vegan and it's going to be our business full time. I always was like, but what if we fail? What if it's a, horrible mistake? And, what are we going to do? And he always said, I have more faith in the two of us than I have in anyone else in the world. And that always grounds me. Like, okay, if we have to start at ground zero again, well, at least I'll be with him. I know that we'll be okay.
Right.
And that's really all I need,
That's beautiful. And of course, such a way for Anthony to say it, with his smooth tones there, in the way he can say something. My wife says, has a very similar phrase, which is, whatever, if we end up in a tent together, as long as it's us two and the kids, I'm good.
Yep.
And like, there's just something about that confidence in me. And then the confidence that even if it all goes away, we don't care.
Yeah.
So there's this freedom that comes with that, which I love. And, speaking of that, as we, I'm loving this conversation and I am taking too much of your time, but speaking of that decision to leap from the corporate gig to doing this full time, what was there a specific fork in the road that you said, I have to make this decision? What was that like?
There wasn't one, there were multiple forks in that road. And I kept taking the fork that led to this decision. I think the first one came when I was listening to the Ritual podcast, and he had a guest named David Epstein, who is the New York Times bestselling author of this book called Range. And he was talking about how, again, this concept of it's okay to fail, because those failures all along the way, they create this unique tapestry. And again, going back to this supply and demand, it creates this supply that nobody else can supply. You are so uniquely you that there's nobody else in the world who can give what you have to bring to the world. The question then is there a demand for that unique perspective or unique skill or unique service that you are equipped to provide? And if not, are you in a position to then create that demand, to stimulate that demand? That was what this podcast was about. At least to me, that's what I took away from it. But ultimately, what that podcast left me with was this sort of fear, which was, wow, like this means that my life isn't over at 40. I actually have the chance to like do something totally different. Like, wow. And I remember that planted a very powerful seed in my heart. And then ultimately, in November of 2020, my TikTok was blowing up. I was also losing my mind at work. And I realized then there is literally no way I can continue to sustain both of these things in my life at this level without losing my mind. So one of them had to go. And it was just like, which one is it going to be? And I was unsure, but I knew one of them had to go. And then fast forward about 7 months, and I met Rich Roll, and I got to be a guest on his podcast. And, you know, if you're familiar with Rich's story, he was also a lawyer. And, you know, he went vegan and he started running. And in many ways, my life paralleled his. And at the end, after the podcast was over, he was like, what are you doing, man? Why are you still practicing? Like, are you kidding? And it was like real talk from my hero. And then 2 days after I got back from California, I called my boss and I said, look, I'm going to have to call it. And my last day is going to be sometime this year.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. That's a great story too, because you know, like you said, there's many forks in the road, and you know, sometimes we think that it is only one fork, that you either make that decision or you don't. But if it's the thing that's meant to happen at this time, you know, it's going to keep showing itself to you. And the fact that you had this very famous podcaster, for those of that are listening to this that may not know him, go check it out. It's great stuff. But basically smack you in the face, not even on the podcast, like after the podcast, saying, what are you doing here? Like, let this take off. It's such a release. It's like not that he had to give you permission, but it was like somebody other than Anthony or yourself giving you permission to go, why aren't you doing this? I see this in you. And I'm, you know, it's like a mentor almost guiding you towards that spot to say, yeah, this is the thing I need to do. Well, I love that. I love that part of the story. How's so the big things you got going on are, you got the cookbook, right? Was that the original book deal, or is there a different book?
No, that is the original book deal. It's just funny because they signed me when I had 37,000 followers on Instagram.
Oh my gosh.
So they're very pleased with Joanne. And I'm so relieved.
I bet they are. I bet they are. Yeah. I bet it's one of their, whoever signed you is like, yeah, see, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Right.
I bet
that advance would have been a lot higher had you had your followers now.
They've been very good to me. We signed a second book deal, and they showed their appreciation for me in that way. And I genuinely believe I have the best publisher in the whole wide world, like literally. And I'm very, very blessed to work with them. But my biggest relief was knowing that I made them proud of me, and they're very proud of me. So that makes me happy.
That is so cool. And you just won a James Beard Award for it. I mean, you got to be like, I mean, what is that? What are you even thinking? I mean, 5 years ago, this was just a mini blog.
Yeah, it was.
Anyone can write a cookbook. Not everyone can win a James Beard Award. I want to remind the listeners of this.
That is it was a very surreal moment. Probably the only 2 times that I cried about the Korean vegan. The first time was when we made the New York Times bestseller list. I cried. And then, accepting the James Beard was the only other time that I cried. And that was in public. So it was pretty embarrassing, but I was just so stunned and like in disbelief that it was me and not anyone else.
It's bonkers.
It is.
It's bonkers is what it is. It's crazy. Who's on your team? You talked about Anthony. Does Anthony help you out? Is there anyone else on your team other than your publishers?
So my team is, pretty sprawling. Anthony helps me a lot with the website and creating a space for our podcast on the website, and just, kind of, things around the house. Like, he does a lot of the housework because I'm constantly working on creating content, and that's been really helpful. I think that beyond that, like, immediately I have my legal assistant also is my assistant for the Korean Vegan. So she helps me with like kind of small admin items, like, putting together my calendar and making sure I'm not late to things. And then beyond that, my lit agent, my talent agency, United Talent, they are a very integral part of the business, and, help to, not just brand the Korean Vegan, but also generate revenue for the business. And then, beyond that, we've got a videographer and, an accountant and, things like that. So, I would say like 90% of it is me, and, Anthony. And then kind of around that, there are people who help to facilitate it. But most of the work operationally is being done by me or Anthony.
That's cool. That's cool. I think the story, or at least one lesson I hope people take from this is, now is such an amazing time to take a chance and start whatever business or thing you want to do. There couldn't be, and this isn't to say what you've done is easy or what I've done is easy, but there couldn't be an easier time in history than right now to do these types of things and to take these chances and to see if that demand is out there. Right? Like, it's super low stakes to see if that demand is out there and get started. So it's just getting past your own fear. Even this podcast, like, I have a successful business. I'm happy about that. But I was so nervous that, and probably no one cares, but like, I was so nervous about starting this thing because I enjoy it. I'm having so much fun chatting with you, and I've had fun chatting with everybody. I enjoy it, and I had to stick to that because my brain was telling me, who the hell wants to listen to what you have to say? No, and I just had to go with it.
I think you're totally right. I think there is really no time in my life history where it has been this easy, where the barrier to entry is so low. I would say, though, like, some people operate better when there isn't that much pressure on them. Like, oh, I have to succeed at this business. I must make, $100,000 my first year or something like that. I think one of the reasons that the Korean Vegan came to be the way that it is because for the first, 5 years, I didn't monetize it. I had no pressure. I just got to do whatever I want, and really just find my voice and figure out what it is that I wanted to say and what that vision was. And then, I was able to monetize around that instead of just being so, anxious to find something monetizable about it. I think if I had gone from that perspective, it would have been very easy to compromise the value and the vision of the Korean Vegan, as opposed to setting myself and establishing myself first and then saying, oh, well, I guess there's a business that can be made out of this. Because there's clearly a demand for it.
Yeah, I think, and to add on to that a little bit, it's that classic story of, if you were looking at it from the outside in, this is an overnight success. It's like, yeah, an overnight success that took 6 years.
Exactly.
An overnight success that took 15 years. Like, exactly. Yeah. There's no such thing there. Yeah. Maybe the followers and the rocket ship is overnight, but there was a lot of work that went into it and a lot of time and energy that went into it. So I have like a million other questions, but I'm going to save that. Maybe we can do it another time. But I want to jump into sort of our final questions, the fast four. This first one's a little interesting because I feel like you're doing the thing I'm about to ask. So just remember, these 4 questions are quick answers. You don't have to spend a ton of time on them, but other than what you're doing right now, what other profession or business would you like to take a stab at? So you can see why that's kind of funny, given that you basically did that.
You know what? I've always wanted to go into sports journalism, just kind of random. My husband's going to be like, what? But yeah, I've always wanted to be like a sports broadcaster. I love sports. And I think that journalism is a pretty cool thing.
That's a great answer. Maybe you need to call your buddy or get an intro to David Epstein. So. And wait, no. Yes, you already know him. Yes, because I saw it on Twitter, and I remember I tweeted him, and I said, "That's my running teammate."
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. No, I remember that. That's right.
That is right. That is right. So you already know him. You're in. You're good. You're good. Okay. What is, and if you need to bring Anthony in the room to answer this question, we can, but what is something you are terrible at?
I'm terrible at directions. I get lost very easily. I'm really bad. I remember once I was running in Italy, and this was my first time like really running long. Running long as, I wanted to get in 8 miles. Well, 8 miles turned into 10 miles and a bucket of tears because I couldn't find my way back to where we were staying. That was horrible. But that's very routine for Joanne.
Oh yeah, and you're in a very that's interesting because I one of my badges of honor, I always say, and again, it's an N of 1, is that I find my directional awareness has gotten so much better since being a runner. Like I always feel like I know what direction I'm heading in. That gene didn't pass on to you from your dad, apparently. The runner in him.
No.
Okay. What book are you reading right now? Or documentary? Book or documentary?
We're in between documentaries. We just finished up the Magic Johnson, They Call Me Magic documentary, and we loved it.
Is it good?
It's so good.
Oh.
And I don't, I just said I love sports, but I actually don't know anything about basketball other than the Bulls dynasty. So, learning about him and his career, particularly after he had to retire from the NBA, was just so powerful and very inspiring.
Cool. It's definitely already on our list, so we'll check that out. And then if you have to look at your phone or whatever, you can do that right now. What's the last thing you listened to on Spotify or Apple Music?
Oh, the last thing I listened to is the Ritual podcast. I was listening to the episode with Dr. Bloom, and it was awesome. And already trying to apply it to my life. What are the macros of happiness and joy? And it was really good.
Awesome. We'll check it out. Cool. Well, Joanne, thank you for spending time with us today. This has been super fun and educational, and your story's great, and you're just fun to talk to. Where can people find you online and get in touch?
Well, they can find me at The Korean Vegan on every social media platform, basically, and certainly at thekoreanvegan.com on the internet. And I similarly had a wonderful time chatting with you.
Thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Yay.